Ruth Elaine Wagner. The community of Racine, Wisconsin was left in shock when Derby Wagner Richardson's body was discovered near her place of work. The question on everyone's mind was, who could commit such a brutal act, and what was their motive? Though many in the town had suspicions, the individual responsible for this horrific crime remained free. This man had previously been accused of battery and abuse multiple times, but had never been convicted. How many more lives would be lost before the authorities took the necessary steps to stop him? Ruth Elaine Wagner, originally from Waterstown Township, Blue River, Wisconsin, was raised in Boscobel where her family settled. She spent her childhood on a farm in the area, which was known as the turkey capital of Wisconsin. Ruth married her high school sweetheart, Robert Lindner, and together they had 2 children, Deborah and Byron. Deborah, born on May 2, 1958, in Boscobel, was cherished deeply by her grandparents, Bertha and Harry Wagner. Derby, a nickname affectionately given to Deborah by her grandparents, became an enduring part of her identity. Born just a year after her teenage parents' marriage, Derby faced challenges early in life. Her father, Robert Linder, served in the army, which meant the family frequently relocated. This constant movement was necessary to support their growing family, but it left Derby feeling unanchored. It wasn't until she was nearly 9 years old that she was able to form lasting friendships. In May of 1967, Derby's mother, Ruth Wagner, chose to settle in Madison following a difficult divorce from Robert Linder. For a long time, Ruth remained single, dedicating herself to raising her children. However, in 1974, she found love again and married James Erickson. The divorce had a profound impact on Derby, who, at 14, decided to run away from home. Eventually, Ruth's second marriage also came to an end, and in 1986, she remarried once more. Derby had no way of knowing this since she was already busy with her own life. Douglas Coppin stepped into her mother's life, and Derby had stepbrothers Daniel and Alan Coppin. She had a baby sister, Gina Coppin, as well. Her family had grown, but she felt lonely and left out. She needed to build another life as she felt abandoned by her mother. 2 years after running away from home, Derby walked into a bar in Racine, where she met Fred Wagner Richardson. Much like an unfortunate cliché, she quickly became infatuated with him. At 30 years old, Fred had a certain charm, and his past, which included joining the U.S. Army under a false name, intrigued the impressionable teenager. What she did not know was this man was bad news. He had a long record of misconduct and felonies in the Army. During his time in the military, he allegedly leaped out of the bushes assaulting and robbing a man. This led to a prison term and a dishonorable discharge. Following his move to Racine, he acquired 2 additional robbery convictions. Fred served only a portion of his 15-year sentence, and his freedom was a consequence of the criminal justice system's flaws, where criminals can sometimes walk free due to technicalities. After his release from Leavenworth Prison, he chose to settle in Racine, a typical industrial town that offered the opportunities he was seeking. He opened up a bar where he met Derby, who was then 16 years old. Fred Wagner was smart. He might have been a career criminal, but by swindling and wit, he could own a few rental properties around the town. They consisted of low-income housing units. He had a reputation for being ruthless in his business dealings and in his personal relationships. He was all about facts and very cold when it came to money. Fred gave her work as a bar dancer. Still a minor, she faked her way for years, dancing for tips. She did not know how to protect herself, and this was the first job that paid her enough to live slightly more comfortably than on the streets. Being a minor, she could not legally be paid, so Fred took advantage of this fact and exploited her. Since he had rental properties, he gave her some shelter as well in exchange for her services. He managed to have control over her from the very beginning. She saw him as her savior while he was just using her. Derby and Fred got married in 1979. They went on to have 2 babies, August Marie and Joy, born in 1980 and 1984. By now, Derby had introduced her family to her mother Ruth. Ruth did not approve of Fred from the get-go. Over time, Fred became more and more dominating in the marriage. Several of Derby's acquaintances and colleagues knew about the strain in the couple's relationship. After the initial honeymoon period, Derby quickly realized she was trapped in an abusive marriage. Fred was much too aggressive when he was angry and was exceedingly controlling. Since she was a teenager when she married him, she endured the abuse until she could build up her own strength. Her friend and colleague, Kelly Williams Cherry, would often babysit the couple's young girls. Kelly was among the people whom Derby confided in about the mistreatment she endured from Fred. In June 1986, Derby gathered the courage to walk out on Fred. She ran away after enduring a rocky marriage for several years. Derby was also quick about legal proceedings after being advised by friends and lawyers. Despite Fred's aggressive response, she stayed her ground and did not budge. She initiated divorce proceedings in December 1986. The couple shared significant real estate assets in Racine, which needed to be divided. Fred faced the prospect of losing a considerable portion of his earnings. This included an alleged 50% of the properties and 25% of rental income amounting to an estimated $250,000. Derby could not bear the violence any longer and was terrified that Fred was on the brink of harming her. He was not one to stay quiet in money matters. Things got ugly very fast. Since it was all still very fresh, Derby was not sure how the custody arrangement was going to be. So she agreed to let Fred take the girls every other weekend. But Fred was vindictive. He had something else in mind. On January 21, 1987, Derby was preparing to send the girls off to their father. Fred showed up and beat Derby in front of the little girls, 3 and 7 years old. They were scared out of their little minds. He strangled Derby till she fainted. 5 days later, she filed a temporary restraining order against him. He was also convicted of battery a few weeks later. Things were escalating fast. She knew she had to get away and save her life. Derby was working very hard to turn her life around. She was working very hard to provide a good life for her girls. She was only 28 years old, so she had a lot she could plan for her future. Derby held down a lot of jobs. She served as a secretary at the Visiting Nurse Association of Kenosha and worked as a security guard for Guardian Protective Services. She also acted as a fitness counselor at the Racine YWCA over the weekends. She had recently applied for the role of Deputy Sheriff of Racine County. She wanted to work for Racine County Sheriff's Office and aspired to become part of law enforcement one day. She wanted to help teenagers that were caught in helpless situations, perhaps also help women out of abusive marriages. On March 21, 1987, a meeting occurred between Derby, Fred, and their respective attorneys. It ended in a manner that made Derby feel like her life was in danger. Her attorney concurred and notified the police to request police protection for Derby. Barb Smith, who served as a victim witness specialist at the Racine County District Attorney's Office, guided victims through the legal proceedings. She vividly remembered helping Derby when she sought a temporary restraining order. Smith explained that it was a time before domestic violence cases required mandatory arrest policies. This meant that the police had the discretion to decide whether to arrest the alleged abuser. In 1987, victims had to physically visit a police station to file criminal complaints. When Derby reported her battery, obtaining a temporary restraining order was a separate process. Smith expressed frustration with temporary restraining orders. She described them as largely ineffective and often igniting the situation. She recalled advising victims, "This is the most dangerous time for you." She emphasized that the restraining order could escalate existing violence. As Derby left, Smith could vividly remember her saying, "It does not really matter. He is going to destroy me anyway." In that particular meeting on March 21st, the pair were dividing multiple rental properties that they owned together, including rental income. Reportedly, Fred cried and said, "I am very hurt. I am very hurt." Fred Wagner Richardson pointed a threatening finger at her and said, "I do not like being hurt." He was incredibly upset that he would lose money from his rental properties as a result of the divorce. Derby worked as a night shift security guard at Steiberg Engineering, 1600 Gold Street. She patrolled the inside of the locked building surrounded by a fence topped with barbed wire. As usual, on the evening of March 21, 1987, she left her girls with Kelly, her friend who babysits her children. Derby would always make her promise that if Fred ever showed up, she would not let him near her girls. Kelly was the only one she trusted with her girls as she went off to do multiple jobs to make ends meet. This was about 12 hours after her hair-raising meeting with her soon-to-be ex-husband. Despite being emotionally shaken, Derby had to go on. Derby usually checked in with her firm at 1 a.m. She failed to do so that night. The firm grew concerned when they realized she was not responding and was nowhere to be seen. The management of Steiberg Engineering called authorities around 1:30 a.m. when they could not locate her. Investigator Al Felian responded to the scene that morning in his capacity as a patrolman. Officers proceeded to Steiberg and initiated a search for her and her Pontiac Sunbird, but they were unsuccessful in locating her. 7 hours later, around 8 a.m., an officer spotted Derby's car. It was parked in an alley at 1546 Layard Avenue, just north of Steiberg Engineering. This was all fine, except for one unsettling detail. Blood was dripping from the drainage holes in the trunk of her car. The blood ran down the pavement. Inside the trunk, police recovered Derby's lifeless body. She was completely naked and her mouth had been gagged with white duct tape. Her throat and wrists had been slashed brutally. She was nearly decapitated, such was the aggression of her neck wounds. Over the next 24 hours, her clothes were recovered scattered along the street. Her tan uniform, her security badge, and a shoulder patch from her uniform, along with a brown shoe were found. A man living on Island Avenue found some of her papers and her ID. In the early hours of the next day, a newspaper carrier found her appointment book on Spring Street and Highway H. Investigators also recovered a pair of black and red bolt cutters from the scene of the crime. DNA analysis was still not well known, but everything was well preserved as was the procedure at the time. The medical examiner revealed some disturbing details, but they would help paint a picture of what exactly happened. Derby still had all her jewelry on her body, so she was not being mugged or robbed when this tragedy happened. That was ruled out as a motive. There was also no evidence of assault. A pathologist carried out a thorough examination. He confirmed that the injury to Derby's head was caused by bolt cutters. Investigators discovered that the suspect had entered the Steiberg Engineering property by cutting a section of the chain-link fence along its east side. Crime scene photographs revealed a shoe print on the property with a pointed toe resembling a cowboy boot. This matched the footwear worn by someone she knew, as investigators later learned. Derby had a routine of bringing her children's clothes to work for folding. She often parked her car by the lunchroom door to easily carry the laundry basket back and forth. So the perpetrator was waiting for her and attacked her while Derby made one of her trips. Her jacket was found with inside-out sleeves. An examination revealed that someone had attempted to grab Derby from behind. She managed to squirm away and flee towards the nearby office as marks on the door indicated that Derby locked herself inside. They could see denim marks on the door. It looked as if someone repeatedly pushed against the door with their shoulder, wearing a denim jacket. The assailant struck her unconscious, then proceeded to tape her mouth with white duct tape. Then she was transported to the trunk of her car. The presence of duct tape suggested premeditation. According to experts, Derby's personal items were scattered around town to mislead investigators. It seemed plausible that the perpetrator feared becoming the prime suspect. Investigators deduced that the assailant drove Derby to another location where she was stripped and subsequently lost her life. He then drove the car back to her workplace. perhaps because the perpetrator needed to retrieve their own vehicle. This was vengeance, a hateful crime against Derby. So 3 things were certain. Number 1, the perpetrator was probably someone with a personal vendetta against Derby. Number 2, it was someone she knew because they were familiar with her workplace routine. And number 3, Derby had struggled and fought till the end. A relative realized that the black and red bolt cutters in evidence belonged to none other than Fred Wagner Richardson. A tip directed the police's attention to a vehicle resembling Derby's. It was spotted near Fred's housing property on State Street that fateful night. Witnesses recalled seeing someone loading an object into the trunk. A large object like maybe a rolled-up carpet. Acting swiftly, law enforcement executed a search warrant at the location, but they struggled to gather enough evidence to charge her ex with the slaying. Throughout, Fred steadfastly maintained his innocence. During the investigation into the case, authorities recovered evidence from both Steiberg Engineering and the vicinity where Derby's car was located. An RPD officer on night duty reported sighting a vehicle similar to Derby's parked at the rear service door of 1212 State Street around 3 a.m. The property was under the ownership of Fred Richardson. Residents of the property informed the police that the basement and rear door where the car was parked were solely used by the property owner. None of the renters had keys or access to that part of the property. They recovered a sales receipt for red bolt cutters, the same type found on the crime scene. Fred had made some unusual comments to his friends. A lot of them seemed made up and would turn out to be untrue as officers interviewed various witnesses and friends. He allegedly told a friend that he was too busy to make plans over the weekend because his children were going to spend the weekend with him. It was Derby's turn to have the children that weekend, so it did not make sense for him to lie about it. What was he trying to hide? When another friend wanted to meet up, he said he was sick in bed all weekend. Brian Linder, Derby's brother, insisted Fred was the only one who would want to harm his sister. Ruth Wagner, her mother, and all of her loved ones repeatedly asked the police to investigate Fred. The tragedy took a toll on Derby's mother. Ruth had been looking forward to Derby's independence. She had finally walked out of an abusive marriage and was going to progress in life. Now her granddaughters were left without a loving mother. And most frustratingly, the man she knew was behind her demise was walking free. Initially Ruth took in the 2 little girls, but then Fred fought for them. After a 2-year-long bitter custody battle, he won custody of his daughters. Not one to sit around helplessly, Ruth became an advocate for victims' rights legislation in Wisconsin. She got busy working as an accountant, realtor, and even a prison guard. From an office manager to a tax collector for the state, she had a diverse experience. She did everything so she did not have to face the pain of losing her daughter. She regularly urged the police to work on her daughter's case and solve it somehow. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and finally, the months gave way to years. A decade after the tragic discovery in the industrial alley, the case remained unsolved. Her mother held a 10-year anniversary in hopes of motivating the police. Each time there was publicity about her daughter's case, the police department got calls and some faint leads. To boost the visibility of the investigation, Ruth organized a public vigil. It took place in the alley where her daughter's body was discovered. The event was scheduled for 6 p.m. on a Saturday in the 1500 block of Laird Avenue. She chose a weekend so that a maximum number of people would show up. During the vigil, some attendees would recite writings about Derby. Others would be encouraged to share their memories of her. Ruth also mentioned that a balloon release would be included as part of the vigil. Time had helped Ruth come to terms with the tragic reality of her daughter's final moments, but she still felt a pang of pain whenever the well-intentioned but perhaps ill-considered saying, "Life goes on," was mentioned. Ruth remarked the following: "Yes, life goes on, but not as we intended. I think about her every day. I still miss her every day." She struggled with a profound and enduring sadness stemming from her inability to share her life with a daughter. Derby was headstrong, independent, and dedicated to providing a better life for her two daughters. Ruth hoped that the publicity of the vigil could spark a memory. Maybe someone would see Derby's picture on the TV and remember who she was. Or perhaps they had seen Fred. Maybe, just maybe, someone would come out with information. For the Racine Police Department, it was an embarrassingly open secret. They knew Fred was a possible suspect, but their hands were tied. By then, Fred had moved out of Racine. He settled in southwest Philippines, Consolation, Cebu. He married a woman named Lola. His girls grew up there, and he spent a content life. He would go on to have more children and even grandchildren, one of which he would have shared with Derby. August Murray's daughter never knew her loving grandmother and was further estranged from her great-grandmother Ruth. Through his attorney Domingo Cruz, Fred consistently denied any involvement in the case. Cruz also dismissed the police's focus on his client, suggesting it stemmed from a desperate desire to make an arrest. Cruz continued to represent Fred in the investigation. He criticized the police for quickly zeroing in on his client as the suspect. He feels that they have neglected other leads that could have led to the true perpetrator. Her teenage daughters were growing up without Derby and Ruth and knew only Lola and Fred. They believed their father had been wrongly interrogated. Ruth retired at the age of 69 and continued to volunteer and attend support groups. She passed away in 2022 with Derby's case unresolved, but she had expressed her wishes that those who attended her funeral service would wear bright colors or their favorite colors. She did not want flowers. Instead, she urged everyone to make donations to domestic abuse intervention services in Madison, as well as the Women's Resource Center and Bethany Apartments in Racine. In a way, losing Derby shaped her life to be that of a voice for the helpless. But even after she was gone, the sinister words of Fred would be stamped on her memorial profile. He coldly commented, "Karma has a way of leveling the playing field." In 2024, officers paired with a documentary team that wanted to further investigate the case. They visited Fred, who was now back in the States. At 82, Fred was confined to a wheelchair. Although Fred's new wife let officers in, Fred did not want to talk. Alphelian, the original detective on the case, reopened the files and went through everything with a fresh perspective. Nothing was new. Despite this, the team believed they had gathered sufficient evidence to present the case to the district attorney. Brian Linder, Derby's brother, shared that their mother would have been very relieved. Earlier in 2024, Racine PD was given a tip that Fred, who is a convicted felon, was illegally in possession of firearms. They had a search warrant for his rental properties. Police searched Fred's home on March 28, 2024. They recovered 4 handguns and 2 tasers. They also recovered a pair of bolt cutters that were identical to the ones found at the crime scene in 1987. It was identical to a pair he bought a month after Derby's demise. It was illegal for him to own firearms. As a result of this investigation, an arrest warrant was issued. Fred was arrested at one of his properties that same day. He was charged with first-degree engagement in premeditated unlawful slaying, 4 counts of possession of a firearm by a felon, and 2 counts of possession of electronic weapons. At 82 years old, Fred could face the remainder of his life in prison. 37 years later, Derby was finally going to get justice. The Racine PD held a press conference on April 5th to share the news. On Wednesday, April 10th, 2024, Fred pleaded not guilty to the case in Racine County Circuit Court. He is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by the law. Prosecutors asked for a $1 million bail for Fred. The court commissioner approved $50,000 cash and a $50,000 signature bond. Fred provided the $50,000 cash and was subsequently released. Racine County District Attorney Patricia Hansen emphasized the importance of linking Fred and his belongings to the crime and its timing. Investigators noted that there were no significant new developments in the case, but highlighted a recent shift in perspective by 2 detectives. District Attorney Patricia Hansen stated that there was enough circumstantial evidence to proceed with the trial. She emphasized the need to present the evidence in court. Derby's family expressed their desire for justice. They acknowledged the toll the situation had taken on them. When news channels knocked on Fred's door for comment, he did not respond. District Attorney Hansen feared he might flee, given his ties to the Philippines. As a result, he had to surrender his passport. Derby's brother expressed his disappointment in the system, but also an amount of relief. Ellie Schmidt, and of Derby, said, "I do know I speak for the entire family in expressing deep gratitude to everyone who made it possible for us to be standing here today." She also said ideally, it would be my sister Ruth standing here. She fought so hard and for so long to get justice for her daughter's case. Racine County Detective Todd Lauer said that we have asked ourselves that question many times. Why? Why not? Years ago, the case was always there. We managed to present the case in a way that seemed straightforward, putting it before a jury to allow them to make a decision. Racine, being a small town, lacked the resources for more extensive investigations and follow-ups. Additionally, the grand jury required more evidence than what was initially available to proceed further. Despite all the evidence pointing to Fred, he had the means, motive, and opportunity to take Derby's life. It took 37 years for justice to begin to unfold. While Fred remarried, had a son with Lola, and saw his grandchildren grow up, Derby's life was tragically cut short, driven by vengeance. A status conference for the case is scheduled for July 12, 2024. Moving on to the next case. The Mysticle Temi Fernandez Casas. In May 2001, partial skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were found in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary responded to the scene, where the remains were discovered in a wooded area off Minerals Road in Conception Bay South. It was determined that the remains belonged to a male, aged between 18 and 29 years at the time of his death, with dark, curly, shoulder-length hair. Investigators worked diligently to identify the man, but their efforts were unsuccessful. He came to be known as Conception Bay John Doe. It was determined that his death was the result of a homicide. An isotope analysis was conducted in an attempt to gather more information. Forensic sketches of the man were created over the years and released to the public in the hopes of aiding his identification. Despite the extensive efforts of law enforcement, no matches were found, and the case eventually went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In August 2021, after continued attempts to identify him, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary submitted forensic evidence to Othram for further analysis. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the victim. They then used this profile to conduct genealogy research. This ultimately provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using this new information. The genealogical research and subsequent investigation determined that his ancestry traced to the Iberian Peninsula, which is made up largely by the countries of Spain and Portugal. However, low genetic matches and the lack of historical records complicated the search and development of the case. Genetic relatives were traceable to Cuba. Unfortunately, reference testing necessary to home in on the identity of the John Doe presented unique challenges. In early 2024, after 23 years, there was a breakthrough in the investigation when a match was made to a first cousin of the man. With this newly identified relative, potential family members residing in Cuba were identified for interviews and reference testing. This led to the identification of Conception Bay, John Doe, as the Mysticle Temi Fernandez Casas. Temi was originally from Cuba. He went missing in Canada over 2 decades ago after traveling from Cuba to Quebec City on a tourist visa in April 1992. There is no record of his travels from Quebec City to Newfoundland and Labrador. It is believed that his life ended between 1997 and 1998. It is also believed that he would have been in his early 30s at the time of his demise. According to stable isotope analysis that was performed post-mortem, Temmie has spent most his time in southern Quebec and or the northeastern United States. However, closer examination of the man's dentition and hair revealed that he most likely had left the area approximately 18 months prior to his demise. It also shows that he had been traveling extensively around the east coast of Canada within 13 months of his demise. With Temmie positively identified, investigators are looking to put together a timeline of his movements in the last months of his life. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary is looking to speak to any known associates of Temmie. They are particularly looking to speak to a Joanne Bergeron. It is believed that she has also spent time in Cuba prior to April 1992, where she worked as a travel agent. Today, she would be approximately 68 years old. A dedicated email has been set up for direct communication with the investigative team. You can contact them at report@rnc.gov.nl.ca with any information. Alternatively, you can call 709-729-8000. To report anonymously, reach out to Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS or visit www.nlcrimestoppers.com. Moving on to the next case. Carlina Renee White. Carlina Renee White was born on July 16, 1987, in New York City to Joy White and Carl Tyson. On August 4, 1987, when Carlina was just 19 days old, her parents brought her to the hospital because she had a fever. At the hospital, a woman dressed as a nurse approached the parents and offered comfort, but she was not an actual hospital employee. Her name was Petway. Petway had devised a plan to pose as a nurse in order to abduct a baby. After experiencing several miscarriages, Petway came to the painful realization that she could no longer conceive. At 2:30 a.m. on the morning Carlina's parents brought her to the hospital, Petway removed Carlina's foreline and abducted her. Although the hospital had video surveillance, it was not operational at the time, leaving the only description of the abductor to come from Carlina's parents, Joy White and Carl Tyson. A security guard reported seeing a woman matching the description leaving the hospital around 3:30 a.m. While no infant was visible, it was possible that the baby was concealed. The abduction of Carlina White became known as the very first known infant abduction from a New York hospital. Carlina was raised as Nedra Nadine Nance by Petway in Bridgeport, Connecticut. This was about 45 miles from where her parents lived. Carlina attended Thomas Hooker School and graduated from Warren Harding High School. Petway and Carlina later moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Carlina did grow suspicious in her teens that Petway was not her biological mother because she was not able to provide a birth certificate. In 2005, Carlina was pregnant. She asked Petway to give her the birth certificate so that she could apply for health insurance. Petway then obtained a forged Connecticut birth certificate. When Carlina attempted to use it, the officials told her that it was a forged document. When confronted by Carlina, Petway finally confessed that she was not her biological mother. Petway did not tell the entire truth, however. She told Carlina that she had been abandoned by a drug addict. When Carlina was 23 years old, she used websites such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There, she found images of the kidnapped Carlina White that resembled infant photos of herself as Nedra and those of her daughter, Simone. Carlina decided to call the center's hotline and was able to get into contact with her birth family. In January of 2011, DNA tests confirmed that she was the missing Carlina White. After the confirmation that Nedra Nance was really Carlina White, the Federal Bureau of Investigation began a search for Petway. Petway turned herself into the FBI office at Bridgeport on the morning of January 23, 2011. Petway confessed and told federal investigators that she kidnapped Carlina after enduring several miscarriages because of the stress over whether she would ever be able to be a parent. On July 30, 2012, 50-year-old Petway was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The judge said that she was selfish and inflicted a parent's worst nightmare on a couple. Petway served her sentence in the Federal Correctional Institution, Aliceville in Alabama, until she was released on April 14, 2021. Carlina's reunion with her parents was not so smooth. There were conflicts about money, the fact that Carlina still wanted to be called Nettie, and her love for Petway. But with the last public updates, it does fortunately seem like Carlina made peace with her parents, and they are all on good terms. Moving on to the next case. Bryce Rhodes. Bryce Rhodes, 25 years old, exhibited reprehensible behavior and showed no remorse or guilt for his actions. He is accused of murdering two brothers, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon, whose bodies were discovered after a disturbing 911 call alerted the authorities. When their mother, Elizabeth Wren, received the heartbreaking news, her world shattered. What intensified the pain was the horrific manner in which her sons were killed, stabbed multiple times in the chest before their bodies were set on fire. The brutality of the crime left many questions unanswered, including why Bryce Rhodes would resort to such horrific violence. According to Bryce, the boys had discovered a secret of his that had the potential to ruin his life. This secret, though never fully revealed to the public, seems to have been the trigger for the unimaginable act. The possibility of losing his freedom or facing exposure may have driven him to commit such a gruesome crime. The fact that two young lives were taken, and in such a violent manner, adds to the chilling nature of the case. It raises the question of whether the secret Bryce feared was truly worth the lives of the two boys. The 22-year-old girl's curiosity led her to a disturbing discovery. As she investigated the abandoned building on River Park Drive, she noticed signs of a recent fire. The building, which had appeared intact the day before, was now charred and damaged, suggesting that something violent had occurred. Her decision to investigate further would later be recognized as a key turning point in a chilling case that would unfold. Upon further investigation, it became clear that the fire was connected to a much larger and more horrifying series of events. It would soon be revealed that the fire had been deliberately set, and it was linked to the gruesome murders of Larry Ordway and Maurice Gordon. Their bodies had been burned beyond recognition, and the fire was part of a horrific attempt to cover up the brutal crime. The connection between the fire and the murders became a pivotal piece of evidence for law enforcement as they began to piece together the disturbing circumstances surrounding the boys' deaths. The fact that this discovery was made by an ordinary individual, simply out of curiosity, turned out to be a crucial development in the investigation. It highlighted the potential for the smallest details to help unravel a horrifying mystery. Amidst the mess of the burned building, she spotted something strange, a shape that seemed out of place. As she went closer, her heart pounded with fear as she discovered it was a dead body. But the surprises didn't end there. Not far away, she had found another body, and both of them were badly burned. Feeling extremely scared, she quickly called the police for help. The area quickly became flooded with police officers working to unravel the strange events that had occurred there the previous night. The crime scene was so horrific that the police described it as the worst they had ever encountered. One officer, visibly shaken, had to pause, unable to contain his emotions as he covered the two lifeless bodies with a white cloth. The bodies were quickly transported to the hospital for an autopsy by pathologists. In the meantime, the remaining officers continued to search the scene meticulously for any potential clues to aid in the investigation. After the autopsies, it was revealed that the cause of death wasn't the fire, but something even more sinister. According to a document released from the coroner's office, both boys had suffered severe head injuries from blunt force trauma, as well as stab wounds to their chests. What's even more chilling is that they had already died hours before their bodies were set on fire and left at the scene. Now, to begin their murder investigation and gather clues, the police needed to figure out who the boys were and why someone would harm them in such a terrible manner. Despite the bodies being badly burned, the police had a stroke of luck as they managed to create sketches of the boys. The sketches were released to the public, accompanied by a plea for anyone who might recognize them to come forward and assist in their identification. However, the authorities didn't rely solely on the sketches. They also scoured missing persons reports from the days leading up to the discovery. hoping to find matches for the victims' descriptions. Unfortunately, their efforts led to no answers. As the days passed, and Monday arrived and departed, no one came forward to identify the two boys. The following day, on May 23, 2016, a worried woman named Elizabeth Wren rushed to the police station. She was visibly anxious as she told the officers the sketches they had released were of her sons, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon. Elizabeth was shocked when the officers delivered the heartbreaking news that her sons' bodies had been found completely burned. The police told her that they were suspecting foul play and believed it wasn't just an accident, but rather a carefully planned murder. Elizabeth desperately wanted to see her sons one last time, but the officers had to gently refuse her request. The bodies were in such a horrible state that it wouldn't have been appropriate for a mother to witness. Despite feeling utterly helpless, Elizabeth gathered her strength and shared a crucial piece of information with the police. Elizabeth recounted to the police how on the evening of May 21, 2016, her sons had informed her that they were going out with some friends whom she had never liked. Despite her attempts to prevent her sons from hanging out with these friends in the past, they still went ahead. That night, they headed to a party with 3 individuals: 17-year-old Jackery Taylor, 15-year-old Antoine Carter, and 25-year-old Bryce Rhodes. Elizabeth expressed her concern about Bryce, who had a troubling criminal history involving various serious offenses, like domestic violence, physical offenses, kidnapping, and even abusing individuals. The boys assured Elizabeth they'd return soon, and even though days had passed without any sign of them, she didn't worry much. They had a habit of partying and sometimes not coming home for days, so she thought it was just another one of those times. However, little did she know, this time would bring devastating news that would change her life forever. The police wasted no time in tracking down the entire group. They quickly found Antoine Carter and brought him in for questioning. Meanwhile, they continued their search for Bryce, and by the next day, Tuesday, May 24, 2016, they had located him as well. Another member of the group, Jackery Taylor, was also apprehended on the same day, all within a short span of time. Bryce and Jackery spent hours in police custody as each were speaking separately with detectives about Larry and Maurice. The detectives tried to make Jackery nervous by showing him crime scene photos of the two brothers, hoping to coax information about the murders. However, all Jackery said was that he was friends with the brothers but had nothing to do with their deaths. On the other hand, Bryce insisted to police that he had no idea where the brothers were and eventually requested a lawyer. When Jackery and Bryce didn't provide any useful information, the police decided to change their approach. During separate interviews with Amwin, they noticed a difference in his demeanor. That's when Amwin finally opened up about what exactly happened on the evening of May 21st. He explained that Bryce had called him and Jackery to his apartment that evening. There, Bryce confided in them and expressed his suspicion that Larry and Maurice might tell the police about something they had seen on May 4, 2016, which was Bryce's biggest secret. Bryce managed to persuade Jackery and Amwin to assist him with a plan that involved something terrible: killing the brothers. On the night of May 21st, Jackery went to their house and convinced the brothers to come out by telling them that Bryce was going to take them to a party. Larry and Maurice were a bit unsure at first, but eventually they agreed to go along. As they had left the house, they assured their mother Elizabeth that they would be back later that night. The group had driven to Bryce's house, which he shared with his mother, who happened to be out of town that weekend. As the boys settled in, they began hanging out and having a good time, just like any other party. But Larry and Maurice had no idea that there was something sinister brewing behind the scenes. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an argument broke out among the group and ruined the fun atmosphere of the party. Anjuan told the police that Jackery accused the brothers that they had stolen money from Bryce. When Jackery confronted Maurice about the theft, he became furious. At that moment, Maurice felt threatened and could sense the danger, so he grabbed a knife to save him and his brother. which escalated the whole situation. Anwen stated that when Maurice pulled out the knife, Bryce quickly stepped in and took it away. Then they both managed to overpower the brothers and tied them up with belts. They separated Larry from Maurice so that both brothers wouldn't be able to fight back and left him in the bathroom, while Bryce brought Maurice to his knees in the living room. Maurice pleaded for their lives, but Bryce demanded that he beg for forgiveness. It was a tense moment as Jackery and Anwen watched Maurice tearfully beg for forgiveness, hoping to save himself and his brother from whatever was about to happen next. Bryce's cruelty knew no bounds. After laying a blanket on the floor under Maurice, he had covered his head with stockings and shoved a rag into his mouth. Then, in a shocking act of violence, Bryce began mercilessly beating Maurice and stabbing him over and over again in the chest. The other teens watching were terrified and shaken by the gruesome and horrific scene unfolding before them. Bryce, with his menacing demeanor, threatened the boys who were witnessing the horror and pressured Anjuan into stabbing Maurice once in the chest. Fearing Bryce's wrath, Anjuan reluctantly obeyed his command and stabbed Maurice. Anjuan continued his chilling account and revealed that once Maurice was dead, Bryce forcefully brought Larry out of the bathroom to the living room where his brother's blood was covering the floor. It was a heartbreaking moment for Larry as he realized his brother was now dead. Morris's lifeless body was moved aside as Bryce turned his attention to Larry. And one vividly remembered Larry's painful voice when he pleaded with Bryce to spare him, but it was all in vain. Larry was subjected to the same horrific treatment as his brother. Anwen still heard Larry's desperate pleas before Bryce had stabbed him a shocking 20 times in the chest. Once again, Bryce threatened Jackery and forced him to stab Larry once. With both Maurice and Larry now dead, Bryce loaded their bodies into the car and called another friend to help dispose of them. As Bryce and his friend drove off with the brothers' lifeless bodies in the back seat, Anjuan and Jackery were left behind at the apartment as Bryce instructed them to clean up the gruesome scene. Anjuan continued his confession by revealing that Bryce drove their lifeless bodies to an abandoned lot and set them on fire. As the flames engulfed Maurice and Larry, their bodies burned that fateful night. However, by some stroke of luck, their bodies hadn't turned to ashes. After Anwen's interrogation, the police finally uncovered the horrifying truth about how Larry and Maurice met their tragic end. However, there were still lingering questions in their minds. What was the brothers' connection to Bryce? And what was the secret that led to such a dreadful fate for the siblings? Larry and Maurice were just regular teenagers who enjoyed life, and even though they were stepbrothers, they shared a strong bond. But things took a turn when they met Bryce in 2015, and his cool personality caught their attention right away. Bryce was a rapper, and he had a bunch of music videos online that made him seem super successful and rich. Larry and Maurice were impressed by his lifestyle and charisma, and soon found themselves drawn into his world. When they all became close, Bryce introduced them to one of his friends, 17-year-old Jackery Taylor. As the three boys hung out with Bryce more and more, they met a fourth teenager, 14-year-old Amon Carter, who also joined their group in 2015. They all used to spend a lot of time with Bryce as he would drive them around, buy them clothes and food, and even give them money to spend as they pleased. In an interview with the police, Jackery revealed that Bryce used to promise them that they would become famous if they followed in his footsteps. As time went on, the boys seemed to embrace Bryce's gangster lifestyle more and more. They even appeared in some of his music videos, giving off the impression that they were adopting his mentality. Elizabeth noted a change in their behavior during this period. Their social media accounts started to fill up with pictures of them posing with fake weapons, showing off stacks of cash and smoking cigars, along with images of women. They also began attending parties regularly and would sometimes stay out for days. On May 4th, 2016, they were returning from one such party late at night, around 12:30 a.m. Maurice was driving Bryce's car with Jackery in the passenger seat and Bryce and Larry in the back, while Anwen was following behind them in a truck. suddenly brakes of his car when he spotted a man walking on the sidewalk of the 800 block of South 41st Street in Louisville, Kentucky. As he strained to remember where he knew him from, it soon clicked that he was Christopher Jones, the 40-year-old man that local gangs were after. But Bryce made a serious mistake. He wrongly identified Christopher, thinking he was someone else trying to collect the reward placed on his head. It was such a mistake that it changed everything in an instant. In a moment of panic, Bryce quickly pulled out his gun and shot Christopher in the chest from the car window. As Christopher fell down, all the teens were stunned by witnessing a murder in front of their eyes. Without even stopping to think, they drove away from there as fast as they could, feeling scared and full of adrenaline. After the shooting, Christopher was rushed to emergency surgery, but sadly, he didn't make it and died during the operation. Bryce had driven the boys home and warned them not to breathe a word about what happened that night. But over the next 2 weeks, Larry and Maurice couldn't shake off the horror of what they had seen. They started avoiding Bryce more and more as they felt uneasy about being around him. Meanwhile, Bryce was feeling anxious too. He worried that the brothers might spill the beans about the shooting to everyone, and he would be in serious trouble. So he made a decision to end their lives on the evening of May 21st, 2016. In a short period, Bryce made a grave decision to take the lives of 3 people, all to protect himself. But now the consequences of his actions are closing in on him. Following the interrogations, both Jackery and Anwan admitted guilt to 3 counts of aiding in murder and tampering with evidence. Because they were under 18 years old, they were sentenced to serve 10 years in juvenile detention centers, with the remainder to be served in adult prisons once they turned 18. As part of their agreements, they were also required to testify against Bryce during his trial. Ever since Bryce was arrested, he made a mess of the court hearings. The victims' families thought he did it on purpose. They believed he was trying to cause chaos because he knew the prosecution wanted the death penalty. He thought if he made enough trouble and delayed the process, they might not give him the death penalty. At first, Bryce did something shocking. He spit on his court-appointed attorney because he found out the attorney was friends with the victim's grandfather. This caused a big problem, and the attorney had to leave the case due to a conflict of interest. Later there was even a fight between Bryce and the attorney. Bryce even made a threatening statement. "I'll see you when I get out." Because of this threat, in future courtroom appearances, Bryce was restrained to his chair and made to wear a spit mask. But even with these measures, his behavior didn't improve. In one hearing, he even threatened the judge and her family. Bryce's antics in the courtroom didn't stop there. Many times he refused to let his attorney speak for him and claimed that he didn't trust them. He even went through 3 different state-appointed attorneys because of this. It was like he was determined to do things his own way no matter what anyone else had said. After this courtroom appearance in 2017, Bryce also tried to escape from prison by digging a hole in his cell. However, officers found the hole and also uncovered a threatening note he sent to Jackery. The note read, "Rats get exposed. Show me that you're not a rat." This showed Bryce's determination to manipulate even from behind bars. In another shocking incident captured on court video, Bryce displayed shameless behavior as he was seen in the video blowing kisses at the mother of the victims. It was a disturbing display of his lack of remorse or guilt for his action. The trial kept getting postponed over and over again, and Elizabeth was becoming increasingly frustrated. Not only with the delays but also with Bryce's attitude in the courtroom. During one hearing, her emotions overwhelmed her, and she had to be removed from the courtroom. Later, when talking to journalists, she revealed that despite trying to find forgiveness through her faith, she couldn't shake the pain of losing her 2 boys to this monster. She described Bryce as sick and a demon, which highlighted the depth of her anguish and anger towards him. After 6 long years of Bryce's senseless behavior and intense courtroom drama, justice was finally served in 2022. Bryce Rhodes was convicted of stabbing and burning the bodies of teenage brothers, murder charges. Along with the 3 murder charges, the jury also found Bryce guilty of tampering with physical evidence and 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. For the murders, the jury recommended a life sentence without parole. Additionally, they suggested 5 years for tampering with evidence and 1 year for each count of abuse of a corpse. While he wasn't eligible for the death penalty, Bryce's sentences will run concurrently, which means he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars unless his defense wins an appeal. After the verdict, the teen brother's grandmother Deborah Wren was emotional while sharing her memories. During the trial, the jury had to think about Bryce Rhodes' mental state when deciding what punishment he should face. The defense brought in Rhodes had an intellectual disability. They also noted that he had ADHD and bipolar disorder, but they believed he hadn't received the necessary support or education to cope with these challenges. Despite these points, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution and the victim. What are your thoughts on the case? How do you think the absence of positive adult role models contributed to the vulnerability of the teenage boys involved? What steps can be taken to prevent similar incidents involving manipulation and violence among vulnerable youth in the future? Moving on to the next case. Autumn Lane McClure. For 20 years, the people of Ormond Beach, Florida, were haunted by the unsolved disappearance of Autumn Lane McClure. The 16-year-old went missing in May 2004, leaving behind a trail of questions and a family desperate for answers. Initially treated as a missing persons case, the investigation took a disturbing turn years later when new evidence suggested foul play. Autumn was a lively and energetic 16-year-old student at Mainland High School in Ormond Beach. Known for her radiant personality and friendly smile, she lived with her grandmother. Autumn McClure worked part-time at the local Winn-Dixie grocery store, where she was a familiar face to many in her community before her mysterious disappearance. On May 10, 2004, her grandmother reported her missing after Autumn's boyfriend claimed he had dropped her off at the Volusia County Mall. In the early stages of the investigation, her grandmother received several letters and phone calls, allegedly from Autumn. The letters stated that she was fine and would return home once she turned 18, but Autumn was never seen or heard from again. Initial investigations centered on retracing Autumn's last known movements and speaking to those close to her. Autumn's boyfriend was among the first individuals questioned, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Despite a continued search for Autumn, no significant leads or evidence emerged that could provide an explanation for her disappearance. Autumn's grandmother, who had been her primary caregiver, played a key role in keeping the case in the public eye, ensuring that her granddaughter's disappearance was never forgotten. Over the years, the investigation was marked by fluctuating periods of activity and frustrating lulls. However, investigators remained committed, periodically re-interviewing witnesses, gathering DNA from family members, and pursuing any new leads that emerged. One leap came in 2016 when Autumn's former boyfriend, previously thought to have dropped her at the mall, confessed to investigators that he had actually dropped her off at the Seabreeze Bridge. She was then picked up from there by her grocery store coworker, Jessica Freeman. Detectives learned that Autumn had been staying with Jessica and her boyfriend, Brian Donnelly, who at the time was 31 years old. The couple admitted that Autumn had stayed with them for a brief time because she was allegedly having problems at home with her grandmother. They provided little information that could help investigators locate Autumn, claiming ignorance. Interviews with Jessica in 2018, who was living in Nevada at the time, yielded no new information. She continued to deny any knowledge of Autumn's fate. It was not until several years later that the case saw a significant breakthrough. In 2021, authorities received a crucial tip that would break the case wide open. Chris Miller, a relative of Jessica and Brian, came forward, blaming that either or both of them were involved in a teenage girl's demise in Volusia County. This tip reopened the case with renewed determination. It led to a controlled call set up by the police. Jessica then admitted that she saw Brian Donnelly end Autumn's life. Donnelly passed away during a medical procedure on May 26, 2022 without facing charges. In the wake of his passing, detectives re-interviewed Jessica, who was granted immunity by prosecutors. After securing her immunity deal, she confessed that Autumn had been living with herself and Donnelly in the Shady Oaks mobile home park. Autumn was involved in an inappropriate and intimate relationship with them before her disappearance. Jessica also told investigators that she had seen Donnelly choking Autumn in their trailer's bathroom, but by the time she intervened, Autumn was already lifeless. He then threatened Jessica, saying that she would face the same consequences if she went to the police. Authorities said they believed the motive was Autumn's plan to go back home, and Donnelly was afraid if she returned home and disclosed their relationship, he would face charges. Jessica also provided investigators with crucial information on the location where Autumn's body would be buried. She pinpointed the place to the 1300 block of Hand Avenue in Ormond Beach. She recalled how Brian Donnelly had revisited the property in late 2021 or early 2022. He had seemed satisfied to find that a new home was being constructed over the area where he had allegedly hidden Autumn's body. In 2023, authorities were able to cooperate with the new owner of a trailer home on the property to conduct an excavation. Utilizing ground-penetrating radar, investigators found irregularities in the soil beneath where the trailer once stood. 20 years after her disappearance, in 2024, the meticulous search allowed investigators to recover 99.9% of Autumn's remains. The discovery of her remains has offered a small sense of peace for her twin brother and the rest of her living family members, who have endured years of uncertainty and pain. While the recovery of her remains and Jessica's confession does provide long-awaited answers, it also gives the family a chance to finally mourn and honor Autumn's memory properly. While justice in a traditional sense is unattainable due to Donnelly's prior passing, knowing Autumn's fate, as terrible as it was, does provide closure on a chapter that has haunted her family for nearly 2 decades. Volusia Sheriff Mike Chidwood expressed his frustration with the situation, saying, "The sad part is he will never face in this world for the evil he perpetrated. I am hoping to God that when he takes his last breath that maybe he has a vision of where he was headed." His words reflect the profound sense of injustice that persists in cases where those responsible for such heinous acts are not held accountable in their lifetimes. The sheriff's statement also highlights the emotional toll on those seeking justice, as they await closure and accountability for the crimes committed. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Wanda Lee Brewer. In September 1979, a hunter discovered skeletal remains along Highway 175 between mile markers 0.80 and 0.83 in Lake County, California, just northwest of Sacramento. Investigators responded to the scene and determined the remains belonged to a female whose ancestry could not be definitively identified. The woman was estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old at the time of her death, which was believed to have occurred between 1976 and 1979. The woman's height was estimated to be between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 4 inches, but no other identifying characteristics could be determined. In June 2019, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, her identity remained a mystery for nearly 5 decades due to the limited identifying information available. Over the years, the Lake County Sheriff's Office continued to collaborate with the California Department of Justice, utilizing emerging technology in hopes of identifying Jane Doe. In 2023, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Lake County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hopes that advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy could help generate new leads to identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Once the profile was successfully built, Outram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team produced new investigative leads that were provided to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. Using these new leads, the Lake County Sheriff's Office continued their investigation, which led to genetic relatives of the woman. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the woman. After nearly 50 years, this comparison confirmed the identity of Lake County Jane Doe as Wanda Lee Brewer. She was born in Arkansas and later moved to California. An investigation into the circumstances around Wanda's demise continues. Moving on to the next case. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. In late March 2024, the normally quiet town of Hugoton, Kansas was shaken by the mysterious disappearance of two mothers, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. What began as an ordinary trip took a sinister turn when their car was found abandoned on a remote road, leaving behind more questions than answers. With minimal evidence but growing suspicions, law enforcement launched an investigation that crossed state lines. As the case shifted towards suspected foul play, arrests were made, one of which involved an individual closely connected to the personal life of one of the missing women. Veronica Butler, born in 1996 in Oklahoma, grew up primarily in Guyman. She graduated from Yarborough High School in 2015, a location eerily close to where her abandoned vehicle would later be found. Veronica worked as a nursing assistant and also contributed her time at a local scale house. Engaged to Tracy Peets, a Marine, she was deeply devoted to her two young children from a previous relationship. Jillian Kelly, 39, originally from Gering, Nebraska, had settled in Hugoton, Kansas with her husband, Heath Kelly, a local minister. Heath Kelly had been appointed as the new minister at Willow Christian Church in Indianola, Nebraska in November 2023, though he had not yet started his position. Jillian, serving as the secretary of the Hugoton First Christian Church, was deeply involved in her faith and the religious community. As a mother of four, she balanced her professional duties with a bustling home life. Known for her warmth and active participation in church activities, Jillian was recognized as a reliable pillar of support. She mentored her peers and was always willing to lend a hand or a listening ear to those in need. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were more acquaintances than close friends, though their lives intersected through their shared involvement in the First Christian Church in Hugoton. While they weren't extremely close, Jillian had been appointed as one of the court-ordered supervisors for the visitations between Veronica and her children. At the time, Veronica's children were residing with a grandparent in Eva, Oklahoma. On March 30th, 2024, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly embarked on what was intended to be a routine trip from Yucatan, Kansas to Eva, Oklahoma. The purpose of the journey was for Veronica to pick up her two children, with plans to celebrate her daughter's 6th birthday. Veronica's son, who was 8 years old, was also part of the trip. This 45-minute drive was one Veronica, as a dedicated mother, frequently made. It was a day that began like any other with both women preparing for the drive. They left early, planning to return the same day as they had done on numerous occasions. This time, unbeknownst to the two moms, the routine trip would take an unexpected and tragic turn. As night fell and neither woman made it to their destination or returned home, their family and friends began to worry. This led to a search that would soon escalate into a full investigation by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI. The last confirmed sighting of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly was when they left Yucatan. Their phone records showed that their devices were still active and transmitting signals until around 9:42 a.m. After that time, both phones ceased transmitting and were no longer detected by the networks. Later that same day, their car was discovered abandoned on a dirt path, about 1,000 feet off Oklahoma State Highway 95 and Road L, south of Elkhart, Kansas. This location was not far from Yarborough School, where Veronica had graduated. The school was closed on Monday, April 1st out of an abundance of caution and reopened but remained on lockdown Tuesday, given the unknown nature of the missing persons incident. The school's superintendent said Butler was part of the class of 2015 and was a class of one that year, meaning she was the only senior graduating. The superintendent wrote, "I joked about her being the top of her class and, well, the bottom also." Location was remote, an open area that rarely saw much activity. The abandoned car stood out to passerby. Inside the vehicle, the scene was disturbing. A small amount of blood was found, suggesting that violence had taken place. Outside the car, separate pools of blood were also discovered, indicating that whatever transpired occurred both inside and outside the vehicle. The doors of the car were left open, implying that the occupants may have been forced out abruptly or had fled in haste. Veronica's glasses were also found in the roadway near a broken hammer. A pistol magazine was found inside Jillian's purse at the scene. No pistol was found. The area surrounding the car was vast and open and offered no immediate clues or witnesses. This isolation only heightened concerns about what might have happened to Veronica and Jillian. From the very beginning, authorities deemed the disappearance suspicious and ramped up their efforts. Search teams scoured fields and forests, while investigators canvassed the surrounding area in search of any clues that could illuminate the women's final known movements. As days passed without any sign of Veronica or Jillian, the communities where they were deeply embedded came together. Prayer services organized by both Willow Christian Church and the Huguenot Assembly of God united residents in hope and solidarity. Social media pages and community bulletin boards filled with appeals for any information related to the case. The Willow Christian Church posted on Facebook, "Please pray that Jillian and her friend Veronica are safe and that they are found quickly. God, please bring these women home to their families who are so worried about them." Behind the scenes, law enforcement worked tirelessly, piecing together the women's last known activities. They checked into the personal and professional relationships and followed up on all tips received. The absence of solid evidence, or a clear lead in the investigation, only intensified the frustration and fear felt by everyone involved. Travis Woodworth, a close friend, expressed the emotional toll, saying, "Not knowing anything, not knowing if they're still here in Kansas, in Oklahoma, or where they are. My heart just dropped. It's been a heartbreaking week with many sleepless nights." Dreely Houts, another friend of the missing women, shared the shock, adding, "Nothing like this really happens around here." So, it was a shock. It was her of all people. Kelly also said that Veronica lights up a room and always shared a smile, and that everyone must pray for her family and fiancé, Tracy. The OSBI spokesperson, Hunter McKee, reiterated the disturbing nature of the disappearance. He mentioned the rural location of the car and the complete lack of contact with the women as primary factors fueling their concerns about foul play. He added, "And usually you can use cameras and footage to see maybe what had occurred or what had led up to that." On April 13, 2024, the investigation led to the arrest of 4 people in connection to Veronica and Jillian's disappearance and demise. 54-year-old Tad Burt Cullum, 50-year-old Tiffany Michelle Adams, 44-year-old Cole Earl Twombly, and 43-year-old Cora Twombly. Eventually, a 5th suspect by the name of Paul Grice was also arrested. Although they had yet to find their bodies, the evidence collected from the scene was instrumental in establishing foul play and aiding in the quick arrests of the suspects involved. Hunter McKee said that the evidence that was discovered inside of that abandoned vehicle and around it were able to help our investigators determine that there was foul play involved. What was in the vehicle and around it, we cannot discuss. The loved ones had to be held back from attacking the suspects as they entered the courtroom, the first time they had been seen in public since their arrest. The 4 individuals were charged with 2 counts of slaying, 2 counts of kidnapping, and conspiracy in the end of Veronica and Jillian. They were booked into the Texas County Jail. The day after the arrests on April 14th in a secluded area of Texas County, Oklahoma. The search for the two missing mothers ended with a grim discovery. Authorities including the OSBI, the FBI, and the Texas County Sheriff's Department announced that they had located two bodies. The remains were then transported to the office of the Oklahoma Chief Medical Examiner to undergo investigation processes and autopsies. Officials said that all children involved are safe. It is unclear where the children were at the time of the slayings. The investigation into the disappearance of Veronica and Jillian led authorities to a rural property less than 10 miles from where the women were last seen. This location became a focal point after investigators uncovered evidence linking the suspects to the area. According to court documents, two burner phones associated with the four suspects had pinged near a recently disturbed plot of land on the property. A hole had apparently been dug, then refilled, and discreetly covered with hay. The property owner, Jamie Beasley, provided chilling details to the investigators. He talked about his interactions with Tad Bird Cullum, one of the arrested suspects. Cullum had allegedly requested to use a skid steer to perform what he harmlessly described as dirt work to bury concrete. Just 2 days before Veronica and Jillian vanished, Cullum had approached property owner Jamie Beasley. He asked about using the heavy machinery to remove a stump and participate in other digging activities. Following the women's disappearance, Cullum, feeling the pressure of the investigation, warned Jamie that law enforcement considered him a person of interest. He noted that the skid steer tracks might look suspicious. Jamie was advised by Cullum to simply assert that the suspect had been carrying out general land maintenance if questioned. As the investigation continued and officials began piecing together not only the how and who behind the crime, but also the way, they uncovered a detail that would shock the entire community. One of the suspects had a surprisingly close connection to Veronica Butler. Tiffany Adams was Veronica's mother-in-law, making her a relative by marriage and the grandmother to Veronica's children, the grandmother with whom the children stayed in Eva. During the investigation, Adams told the OSBI that on March 29 her son and her grandchildren spent the night elsewhere. She had planned to pick them up the following morning prior to meeting up with Veronica. Court documents show that Adams contacted Veronica at 9 a.m. on March 30th to confirm their appointment. According to Adams, Veronica told her she was not going to make it because something came up. Phone records confirm that the conversation happened, but that Veronica was actually on her way to pick up Jillian at the time. Wrangler Rickman, the father of Veronica's two children, had legal custody but was in a rehabilitation facility at the time. This meant that the children were living with Adams at the time of the disappearance. The potential motive in the case seemed to be tied to the ongoing custody battle over Veronica's children that began in February 2019. The contentious legal battle consisted of frequent court appearances and crucial hearings, hinting at the high stakes for all parties involved. 10 days before Veronica went missing, she filed for more visitation and was seeking full custody. There was an upcoming court hearing on April 17th that was poised to potentially grant Veronica an unsupervised visitation rights. OSBI interviewed the person who usually supervises the visits, and she said she was available to supervise that day, but Adams told her to take a couple weeks off from visitation. Adams wanted to question her grandchildren about how Veronica's approved visitation supervisors were. Tiffany Adams sometimes resisted handing over the children to her own son, despite his legal custody rights. The fact that law enforcement has also been called to intervene in the custody issues was a clear indication that there was a volatile family dynamic. Recordings also indicated that Adams and her boyfriend, Tad Cullum, who was also one of the four suspects arrested, had made threats against Wrangler. Wrangler's grandmother reported in February 2024, he told her they did not have to worry about the custody battle much longer because Adams had it under control. Adams knew the path the judge walked to work, and we will take out Veronica at drop-off. Wrangler was confirmed to be in a rehabilitation facility in Oklahoma City at the time of the disappearance. After obtaining a search warrant for Adams' phone on April 1st, OSBI agents discovered searches related to tasers, gun shops, prepaid phones, and methods to lure someone from their home. A search of local gun shops showed Adams had purchased 5 stun guns on March 23 and 3 prepaid cell phones from Walmart. The cell phones were traced to areas significant to the investigation, including where Veronica's car was found and their last known location. On March 30th, between 10:16 and 10:35 a.m., 2 of these phones were tracked to a remote pasture where evidence of recent soil disturbance was apparent. A buried hole covered with hay was found roughly 8.5 miles from Veronica and Jillian's last known spot within a time frame consistent with the disappearance of the 2 mothers. All the suspects belonged to an anti-government group called God's Misfits that regularly met at the Twombly's home. On March 30th, their 16-year-old daughter noticed that Cora and Cole Twombly were not home, but returned around noon. They had allegedly taken a blue and gray Chevrolet pickup truck. After returning, they asked their teenage daughter to clean the pickup's interior. She also told investigators that her mother admitted that she and her father had blocked the road to intercept Veronica and Jillian. They then directed them towards where Adams, Cullum, and Grice were waiting. When questioned about why Jillian had to be slain as well, Ora justified it by saying Jillian was not innocent because she supported Veronica. When asked if the bodies were hidden in a well, Cora's cryptic reply was something like that. Their daughter also talked about earlier attempts to take Veronica Butler's life around Hugoton in February 2024. These attempts included a strategy to lure Veronica Butler outside, a tactic mirrored by the web search found on Adams' phone. Ora also described a plan to simulate an accident by dropping an anvil through Butler's windshield. Such incidents commonly occurred when driving past work vehicles. Prosecutors say there had been many attempts to take Veronica's life. Other court documents show the years of turmoil between Veronica and Adams. Efforts to secure a protection order did not get a judge's approval. Kaysen spoke with Clinton Butler, Veronica's father. When asked if he felt the justice system failed his daughter, he responded 100%. A celebration of life service was held for Jillian on April 28 and for Veronica on May 3. Rice, 31, made his first court appearance in Texas County, Oklahoma on May 1, 2024. It is unclear why the police did not arrest Grice when the others were arrested. His arrest came 9 days later. He admitted that he was a part of the planning, slaying, and burial of Veronica and Jillian. During the hearing, he was denied bail. According to the motion, there were 3 reasons involved in the decision. Proof of guilt is evident, violent offenses are believed to have happened, and he is facing a maximum sentence of life or life without parole. He will get a public defender since he said he cannot afford to hire his own. According to Adams' affidavit, she also did provide a recorded statement to law enforcement indicating her responsibility for the slaying of the deceased. Veronica and Jillian were more than victims in a sensational case. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and loved ones. This case serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that crime has on victims and their families, going far beyond the headlines and courtrooms. For the public and the loved ones of the victims, the wait for the trial and its outcome can be an agonizing period filled with uncertainty. As the legal process unfolds, they must grapple with the slow pace of judicial proceedings. It can often feel frustratingly sluggish compared to the immediate impact and emotional upheaval caused by the crime. The hope for all is that justice for Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly will be served. There is an effort in Kansas to make sure the names of Veronica and Jillian are not forgotten. Hamlin and Beth Beard, co-owners of Maine Revelation, a small business in Yucatan, have launched a t-shirt campaign to support the families of Veronica and Jillian. The t-shirts feature Jillian's favorite Bible verse on the back, and all proceeds will go directly to the victims' families. Rice is expected to return to court on May 15, alongside the other 4 individuals who have been arrested and charged in connection with the case. Moving on to the next case. Petra Zitka. Petra Zitka was a 24-year-old computer science student at Braunschweig University in Germany. On July 26, 1984, She visited her dentist and then stopped by a store to purchase a printer cartridge as a birthday gift for her younger brother, Karsten. She also asked her neighbor, Misha, to water her plants while she was away. Petra had plans to visit her parents in Wolfsburg for the holidays. She told her parents how excited she was to spend time with them, complete her school assignments, and care for her younger brother. Petra's family eagerly anticipated her return home, but sadly, she never arrived. Initially, they assumed she had stayed longer at the university, but there was no trace of her there. 2 days later, when she failed to attend Karsten's birthday party, her parents reported her missing. A large-scale police search was launched, and her case was even featured on television, but no leads surfaced. There was not much to go on for the police, and the case went cold. In 1985, a 19-year-old carpenter's apprentice, simply known as Gunter K., confessed to ending the lives of both Petra and a 14-year-old. The police did not believe his story, however, and found that he had nothing to do with Petra's disappearance. In September of 2015, 31 years after Petra disappeared, there was finally a breakthrough in the case. The police were called to an apartment in Dusseldorf belonging to a 55-year-old woman by the name of Petra Schneider. She wanted to report a burglary. The police wanted to see her ID, and only then did she tell them the truth. She then admitted that she is the girl that went missing 31 years ago. She said that she carefully planned her disappearance. Even after being found, she wants no contact with her family. Since her disappearance, she had been living in various places across Germany under the name Petra Schneider. She had no passport, Schneider. She had no passport, identity card, bank account, doctor, dentist, or insurance. Petra saved up 4,000 Deutsche Marks, equivalent to $2,000 to fund her disappearance. She avoided everyone and kept to herself mostly. If it wasn't for the burglary at her apartment, the case may never have been solved. Her family is devastated. Her father passed away a few years ago, but her brother and mother were in shock and in tears when they heard the news. The police tried to arrange a reunion between Petra and her family, but she is adamant about never wanting to see them again. Let me know in the comments section if you think Petra should have told her family she was safe after leaving. Moving on to the next case. Richard Week. In October 1993, two hunters discovered partial skeletal remains of an unidentified individual on an old vacant lot near Apopka, which had once been used as a vegetable farm in Orlando, Florida. The remains were handed over to the Orange County Sheriff's Office, who conducted an excavation of the area the following day in hopes of recovering additional remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a white male, aged between 45 and 55 at the time of his death. The cause of death was classified as homicide. No other identifying characteristics could be determined due to the limited information and the condition of the remains. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the man's identity remained unknown for over 3 decades. In 2023, the Orange County Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown victim. Once the profile was successfully built, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team produced new investigative leads that were provided to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. The Orange County Sheriff's Office used these new leads to continue a follow-up investigation, which led them to genetic relatives of the man. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the man. This comparison confirmed the identity of Orange County John Doe as 48-year-old Richard Week. Week moved to Florida from New York. He was reported missing by his family, with whom he was in touch with regularly, after he failed to contact them for an extended period of time. Officials are now asking for any information that might assist in bringing closure to the cold case and bringing justice to Richard and resolution to his family. You are asked to contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit at 407-836-4357 or call the crime line at 80,423 tips. Moving on to the next case. Michelle Missy Jones. 18-year-old Michelle Missy Jones lived in Fontana, California, in 1980. She was well-liked and active in her community, helping to start a yearbook club at Park West Continuation School before graduating. Afterward, she landed a job as a dispatcher for the Claremont Police Department. On the evening of July 4th, Michelle was last seen by her siblings as she prepared for a family gathering. However, she never arrived at the event, and her sudden disappearance remains a mystery. The case has continued to haunt her family and the local community. The next morning, on 5th, her parents started to worry when they noticed she had not returned home after going out the previous evening. They started calling her friends, but no one knew where Michelle was. Her parents then had to report her missing. The police received an anonymous tip about a body in a grapefruit grove at Live Oak and Santa Ana Avenue. They found Michelle's body there. She had been assaulted before her life was taken. Evidence was collected and leads were investigated, but the case went cold. Early in 2020, the case was reopened. DNA samples collected by detectives decades ago were reanalyzed. Detectives also conducted more interviews. Some of Michelle's family members felt that a man by the name of Leonard Nash should be looked into. Leonard was the boyfriend of Michelle's sister Melissa at the time her life was taken in 1980. A DNA sample was then taken from Leonard and it matched the DNA of the suspect and was found at the crime scene. On September 8, 2020, 66-year-old Leonard Nash, who now lives in Las Vegas, was arrested. Melissa had this to say after hearing of the arrest: "I'm angry I didn't go to walk free for 40 freaking years. And my sister was at the start of her life. She never did anything to hurt anyone." On September 19th, Michelle's family members gathered around her gravesite. They shared stories and passed around old photos of her. They then released 40 balloons into the air, one for each year they should have had together. Moving on to the next case. Buddy Schumacher's doting family. In 1925, the life of a young child was tragically taken in a horrific crime that deeply affected not only Buddy Schumacher's loving family but also the entire local community. The senseless violence directed at such an innocent and sweet boy left everyone shaken. The brutal nature of the crime unsettled those who experienced its aftermath, yet the police remained hopeful that the responsible party would be caught. Nearly 100 years later, however, there are still no answers in Buddy Schumacher's case. Arthur Buddy Schumacher was born on September 2, 1916. His parents, Art and Florence, were a happy, ordinary couple leading a simple life. They had settled in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and were overjoyed with the arrival of Buddy, their second child. Their firstborn, Jeanette, was about 17 months older than Buddy. Wauwatosa, located just west of Milwaukee, was known as the City of Homes and described as a quaint suburb perfect for families. On the morning of July 24, 1925, Buddy, now 8 years old, had his breakfast before heading out to meet his friends around 9 a.m. He told his family that he planned to take the train with them to a favorite swimming hole, as it was an especially hot day and they wanted to cool off. Art and Florence thought nothing of it and sent Buddy on his way, wishing him a good time as he headed out the door. Buddy and his friends arrived at the train station, boarded the train, and disembarked 15 miles from home. This was the last time the 8-year-old was seen alive. He never returned home that evening. When he didn't come home, Art and Florence initially questioned Buddy's friends. The boys told the couple that they hadn't seen him for most of the day, noting that they'd lost sight of him somewhere along the way between the swimming hole and the train tracks. Art and Florence then decided to contact their extended family members, thinking their son may have stopped in to visit an uncle or cousin, but they quickly discovered that nobody had heard from or seen Buddy. With few leads to go on, Art and Florence organized a search party. They combed the surrounding area, including a nearby river, desperately searching for any sign of their missing child but returned empty-handed and heartbroken. Soon, the police were notified, and the local media was alerted as well. News of Buddy's disappearance spread quickly, with newspapers offering a reward for anyone who could provide information, but no one came forward. Local rumors began to circulate, suggesting that the 8-year-old might have been taken by a family member seeking revenge against Art for reasons that remained unclear. Meanwhile, other parents in the neighborhood began to fret about what may happen if they let their children out of their sight. The police chief of the Wauwatosa Police Department, George Baltus, attempted to reassure families that the crime would be solved and the perpetrator would be apprehended. Beginning his investigation, he decided to speak with Buddy's friends. They initially claimed that an unkempt man had appeared at the swimming hole and had chased the children into a forest, which is where they lost sight of the 8-year-old. However, the boys would go on to tell various differing accounts about what had happened that day. The boys would later tell detectives that they had been chased off by a man from a stone quarry before eventually settling on a different version of events. According to their story, just as they were about to jump off the train to reach the swimming hole, they heard a man shout, "Hey, where are those kids going?" The man who shouted then jumped off the train after them. As they fled, the boys noticed that Buddy was still at the tracks. The last time they saw the 8-year-old, he was being approached by the man who had leaped from the train after them. They described the man as a transient. As Wauwatosa was essentially a transport hub with a good railway line, many homeless individuals had become drawn to the area. Many of them set up camps near the tracks looking for work and using the railways to travel and find employment. As soon as it became public knowledge that Buddy was last seen with a transient man, however, the homeless community came under attack by locals. Investigators received tip after tip that various individuals from the community were responsible for the disappearance. Locals began to resent the homeless men and women scattered around the area and looked for ways to punish them out of fear. On July 27th, 3 days after Buddy disappeared, a 10-year-old orphan led investigators to the site where he was last seen. He and his friends explained that they had recently been harassed by 2 middle-aged men on numerous occasions. This led detectives to theorize that these men who seemed to enjoy harassing young children were involved with whatever had happened to Buddy. However, both men were now gone from the area and were never found. A further 7 weeks would pass before Buddy's family were released from the uncertainty of not knowing what became of their son. Buddy's body was discovered on September 13th by a man searching for mushrooms. The 8-year-old was just 4 feet away from a well-used footpath. Shortly thereafter, the man contacted the authorities. Unfortunately, not long before the body was found, the Schumachers had left town to visit family and escape the incessant media attention. As a result, it was Buddy's uncles who identified the body. Buddy's body was less than a mile from his home. The reports were gruesome. The 8-year-old had been mutilated and was decomposed. He had suffered a horrific beating, been sexually assaulted, strangled, and had a handkerchief stuffed down his throat. This was believed to have caused his death. Now investigating a homicide, the police turned their attention back to the transient community who set up camps near the railway tracks. Their evidence wasn't much, but they felt that if they could find the owner of the handkerchief, they would find the perpetrator behind this horrific crime. In the corner of the handkerchief, the letter had been embroidered. Both Art and Buddy had already been ruled out as being the A. A description of the item was circulated among the public via newspapers. Investigators hoped that somebody would recognize the handkerchief and come forward to help solve the case. As the police continued to investigate, they set their sights on one particular member of the homeless community, a man named Edward Vreeland. Detectives had noticed this individual earlier on before Buddy's body had been recovered, but they had stopped questioning him when the 8-year-old's friends failed to positively identify him. After questioning, Vreeland had been sent to a correctional facility to serve time for vagrancy. In the weeks following the discovery of Buddy's remains, however, authorities approached the young boy's friends again and asked them to look at a police lineup which included Vreeland. Two of Buddy's three friends identified the man as the one who chased them from the train. For detectives, this was it. This was the man behind the horrific murder of 8-year-old Buddy Schumacher. They had solved one of the most sensational cases of the 1920s. And so, having decided that Vreeland was guilty, the police began building a case against him, gathering evidence which fit the narrative they created. Within weeks, two boys had come forward to the police to inform them that Vreeland had taken the two for a walk and, quote, mistreated them. Vreeland denied the accusations. And in the meantime, the authorities returned him to the correctional facility where he was still serving time. On September 22nd, Vreeland arranged a meeting with lead investigators working on Buddy's case. Here, he confessed that he'd been kicked in the head by a horse when he was younger and as a result, often suffered memory blackouts. He claimed that it was possible that he had in fact slain Buddy and simply couldn't remember it. Vreeland was described as a deeply religious man who slept with a Bible under his pillow. It's possible his faith is what prompted him to reveal this information to investigators. Adding further fuel to the fire was the fact that a woman in Wauwatosa, Emma Abel, had remembered washing the handkerchief later used to suffocate Buddy, stating that she had returned it to Vreeland after cleaning. It truly seemed that the authorities had their man. Vreeland's tale of memory lapses quickly leaked to the press, who ran stories labeling him as nothing short of guilty. Meanwhile, over in Illinois, word of Vreeland's guilt reached his brother, Charles. Determined to prove his siblings' innocence, Charles traveled to Wisconsin and hired a local attorney to represent Vreeland. Soon, however, things began to go awry. The handkerchief that had been used to suffocate Buddy was found to be missing. Investigators practically dismantled the police station looking for it, but were unable to find it. It was eventually found a few days later in the district attorney's safe. It had been placed there unknown to officials. Upon finding it, investigators brought in Mrs. Abel, the same woman who had recalled washing the handkerchief, and asked her to positively identify it. Much to their surprise, however, Mrs. Abel said she couldn't. She had previously contacted the police with the memory of washing the item, but now that it was in front of her, she couldn't say whether it was the one she'd returned to Vreeland or not. Further worsening the situation was the fact that Buddy's friends had suddenly recanted their identifications of Vreeland. Two of the three boys had identified Vreeland from a lineup, but having spoken with the man himself while he was imprisoned, they told investigators that actually this was not the same man that they'd seen speaking with Buddy on the day of his disappearance. They stated they had felt pressured by the police to point to Vreeland. As forensic techniques were limited at the time, law enforcement had very little to go on. While they had initially been confident in their apprehension of Vreeland, things were quickly taking a turn for the worse. With so much of the case falling apart, the authorities had no choice but to release the man, and he was returned, yes again, to the correctional facility to finish his sentence for vagrancy. Still, this wasn't the end of Buddy's case. A month later, in mid-October, a prison warden in Stillwater, Minnesota, contacted the Milwaukee police in regards to an inmate recently convicted of the slaying of an 11-year-old boy. 21-year-old William Brandt was given life in prison for taking the life of Francis Pialati. The prison warden felt there were similarities between the deaths of Buddy and Francis. Both boys were mutilated, and both boys had handkerchiefs stuffed down their throats. Although Brandt was interviewed by detectives, he denied any knowledge of Buddy's death. And yet, 5 weeks later, he was quoted in a newspaper after speaking with a reporter, having told them, quote, "I guess I killed that boy in Milwaukee. I do not remember killing him, but I remember being with him, and I remember hiding the body." Notably, Brandt suffered from epileptic seizures, which led to him having memory blackouts and reportedly spells of brutal violence. Of course, this drew investigators back to Brandt for further questioning. While initially the police were hopeful that found their man, the 21-year-old's answers fell short of accurate. He claimed that Buddy was covered in blood following his death, when the 8-year-old had been found fairly clean. Brandt also stated that he'd stuffed the boy's overalls down a drain pipe, but in fact, Buddy was wearing them upon his discovery. Additionally, Brandt said he'd removed the corner of the handkerchief with the on it in order for it to avoid identification, something that we know is untrue as the handkerchief was intact. Furthermore, Buddy's friends were unable to identify Brandt from a photograph. Ultimately, Brandt walked back his confession. Towards the end of 1925, in December of that year, another confession came. This time from a man named Frank Stencil, who was awaiting sentencing in Ohio for breaking into a New York Central Railroad station. Stencil claims to have killed Buddy by strangling him, but authorities, noting their track record, were much more skeptical this time around. Stencil changed his mind and recanted his confession when he was interviewed, telling the authorities that he'd read of the 8-year-old's death in the newspapers. The press at the time labeled both of these men as, quote, morons. They were known to have limited mental capabilities. With no more suspects and no new evidence to go on, Buddy's case came to a standstill. The local community had nothing new to offer, while the transient community had no interest in cooperating with the police given the treatment they received from them as well as from the residents of the town. The case was eventually forgotten by newspapers and the public alike. Another tragedy left forever unsolved. Buddy's grave rests in Wauwatosa Cemetery, alongside the graves of his parents. 2 years after his death, Art and Florence moved to a new home, where they also took in their nephew, raising him as a surrogate son. As of the time of this video, the whereabouts of the case's physical evidence, including the embroidered handkerchief, remain unknown, making it likely that the case will never reach closure. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Diana Criswell. On November 25, 1987, a homeless man discovered the body of a young girl along Interstate 10 in Marana, Arizona. After walking to the local police station to report the grim find, authorities arrived at the scene and noticed tire tracks, suggesting that the girl had been killed elsewhere and then transported to the location where she was found. A medical examiner in Parma County conducted an autopsy, revealing that the girl had been dead for at least 2 weeks. The circumstances surrounding her death and the identity of the girl remained a mystery for years. Her estimated age was between 17 and 21, about 5 foot 6 inches tall and thought to be European American. She was shot 5 times with .22 caliber firearm. In 2010, a forensic facial reconstruction was done. The idea was that people who knew the young woman would recognize her. In 2015, a man and a woman named Ellen and Donald Criswell came forward, claiming that they recognized the young woman. They went onto a website and found the picture titled Palma County Jane Doe, and thought it looked similar to their missing niece, Diana Criswell. It was especially the gap between her 2 top teeth had helped them recognize her. On February 11, 2015, Diana Lee Criswell's DNA was matched to the young woman's DNA. After 27 years, it was finally known who she was. Her family members covered at the cemetery she was buried and replaced the Jane Doe 19 gravestone with Diana Lee Criswell gravestone. Diana was born September 20, 1971 in Washington. After her parents divorced, she became estranged from her family and would often run away. When she was 16, she began a relationship with 36-year-old Bill Ross Knight, and they moved to Tucson, Arizona a few months before her body would be found. Bill owned a .22 caliber pistol. 9 days before Diana was found, he was prosecuted for robbery. In 2005, the man passed away from liver complications while serving time in prison. Authorities believe he was responsible for the death of 16-year-old Diana, though the case remains tied to the mystery of her tragic demise. Despite his passing, questions surrounding the case linger, as the exact details and motivations remain unclear. The investigation into Diana's death continued to uncover unsettling connections, but without definitive proof, the case was left unresolved. Moving on to the next case. Janelle Matthews. On the evening of December 20th, 1984, 12-year-old Janelle Matthews, a member of the Franklin Middle School Choir in Greeley, Colorado, performed in a holiday concert at Intra-West Bank of Denver. Her family was not at the concert. Her father was attending her other daughter's basketball game instead. After the concert, Janelle was never seen again. Her disappearance would lead to an extensive investigation, and her case would remain unsolved for several years, eventually becoming one of Colorado's most notable cold cases. Her mom was with Janelle's ill grandfather. At 8:15 p.m., Janelle arrived home. She got a ride home from her friend's father. 15 minutes after arriving home, Janelle answered the phone and took a message for her father. That was the last time anyone spoke to Janelle. Her father arrived home just after 9 p.m. He found a garage door open, but no one inside the house. He got very worried and called the police. They found footprints in the snow indicating that someone had looked into the windows. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Her disappearance attracted a lot of public interest. President Ronald Reagan even mentioned her once in a speech. Despite this, the case went cold for many, many years. On July 23, 2019, excavators installing a pipeline found human remains. This was about 15 miles from Janelle's home. The remains were positively identified as being those of Janelle Matthews. The next big development in the case came in October of 2020, when 69-year-old Stephen D. Bank was arrested. He used to live in Colorado, but now lives in Idaho. According to the police, Stephen had long been a person of interest in Janelle's disappearance. He intentionally inserted himself in the investigation many times over the years, claiming to have knowledge of the crime. What he told police grew inconsistent and incriminating over time, and finally led to his arrest. Why Stephen kidnapped Janelle and ended her life is still not known. Moving on to the next case. Patricia K. Arith. In September 1986, the remains of an unidentified individual were found in the Columbia River near the Pioneer Memorial Bridge, also known as the Blue Bridge, which connects Pasco, Washington, to Kennewick, Washington. Only the lower torso was discovered, and it is believed that the remains had been in the water for at least 6 months. After the remains were found, an autopsy was conducted by the Benton County Coroner's Office, which determined that the remains belonged to a white female. She was between the ages of 28 to 35 years at her time of demise. The cause of demise could not be determined. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman, they were unsuccessful. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. The woman was buried as a Jane Doe at West Haven Cemetery in Richland, Washington. In September 2023, the Benton County Coroner's Office exhumed Jane Doe's remains, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to identify the woman. After the exhumation process was complete, skeletal evidence was prepared for transport to Othram by the Benton County Coroner's Office. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the woman. Reference DNA samples were collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown woman. This investigation led to the positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Patricia K. Arith, born December 12, 1949. She was known to be missing from the Yakima, Washington area since the early 1980s. Patricia was last seen leaving the Peking Palace restaurant on North 1st Street in Yakima. Peking Palace is no longer in business. She was returning to her office. She had 4 children at the time of her disappearance. She was reported missing by her family on February 6, 1983. The reason for her disappearance may never be known. Yakima police has been contacted and made aware of Patricia's identification. Moving on to the next case. Tammy Sue Aldridge. Have you ever thought about how a simple morning jog, once a peaceful routine, could transform into a nightmare that would torment a community for more than 40 years? Tammy Sue Aldridge, a lively 20-year-old college student, was celebrated for her radiant smile and her love for running. Her life embodied the hope and potential of youth, full of dreams and aspirations for the future. Her commitment to staying fit was something her friends and family admired. Tammy was frequently seen jogging through her neighborhood, radiating joy and determination. However, on June 30th, 1979, she was abducted during her run near Jim Barnwell Road in Burlington, North Carolina. What had once been a peaceful, tree-lined path she frequented became the scene of a terrifying crime. Her sudden disappearance triggered an urgent and thorough search by local authorities and worried residents. But as time went by with no trace of Tammy, hope began to fade, giving way to fear and uncertainty. In a haunting turn of events, Tammy managed to make a phone call home the day after her abduction. Her voice, trembling with fear, briefly reassured her family. The following day, she called again, her tone a heartbreaking blend of hope and desperation. Investigator Dan Denton revealed that during these calls, Tammy told her family she was okay and hoped to return home soon. Her family held on to the slim hope that these calls indicated she was still alive and might be rescued. Law enforcement agencies intensified their efforts, coordinating a widespread search and investigation. The agony of not knowing her fate weighed heavily on her loved ones. The community rallied together, united in their determination to find Tammy and bring her home safely. Unfortunately, this brief, heart-wrenching contact would be the last time anyone heard from Tammy before her tragic end. She was found on July 3rd. Tammy's body was found in the middle of Highway 54, a chilling image that would remain etched in the minds of those who discovered her. Her ankles were bound, and burn marks suggested that a rope had been used to tie her hands and neck. Her shorts were reversed, and her shirt was inside out, pointing to the disturbing reality that her clothes had been put on after her death. The violence of her final moments was undeniable, as it was clear she had been assaulted. When she was found, her body was still warm, indicating she had been alive until shortly before her discovery. An autopsy determined she lost her life due to strangulation. The gruesome details of the slaying shocked the community and left her family in a state of profound grief and horror. Despite the intense investigation that followed, a suspect was never charged or arrested in Tammy's case. The lack of leads and concrete evidence left the case cold. As the years turned into decades, the hope of finding her perpetrator seemed to fade. In August 2007, police officers from North Carolina traveled to a Whiteford Township cemetery to exhume the remains of a man suspected to be the perpetrator. DNA samples were taken from the remains of Larry Chappell, who passed away in 1989 at age 51. Chappell, who lived in that part of North Carolina at the time, was considered a suspect, but there was insufficient evidence at the time to charge him. The DNA samples did not match to those taken from Tammy's body. The case, again, went cold. In 2021, however, the agency decided to revisit the case. They were driven by advances in forensic technology and a renewed determination to bring closure to Tammy's family. New techniques in DNA analysis and evidence processing had the potential to uncover clues that had previously been undetectable. Investigators hoped that these advancements might finally reveal the identity of Tammy's perpetrator and close the case for good. The reinvestigation brought a renewed sense of hope and urgency. A new investigator started looking through old files. Sheriff Terry Johnson said this man was able to find a name that no one had seen in the file, just one piece of paper with a name. Sergeant Dan Denton then reopened the case. He said finding this name was the biggest thing, once you get a name, once you get a lead, once you get something to go on, that is kind of what drives you to keep digging and digging and digging. On Thursday, April 4th, 2024, the Alamance County Sheriff's Office made a pivotal announcement. Tammy Sue Aldridge's life was taken by Gary Lane Laframboise. Laframboise, who passed away in 2020, was revealed to be the likely perpetrator of the horrific crime. He was around 19 years old at the time of Tammy's demise. He lived in Graham, a small town a few miles from where Tammy's body was discovered. His proximity to the crime scene and his criminal history painted a disturbing picture. Just 3 months after Tammy's demise, Laframboise was arrested for an unrelated kidnapping and impersonating an officer. While in custody, he also committed a serious assault on a detention officer, further solidifying his violent tendencies. He served time in prison from 1980 to 1982. Laframboise was identified as a potential suspect through DNA evidence years before, but investigators faced a significant hurdle. They had to contact the Laframboise family, ultimately obtaining a DNA sample from Laframboise's daughter. The comparison of her DNA to the evidence collected from Tammy Sue Aldridge's body yielded a conclusive match. The development was a critical piece of evidence that confirmed Laframboise's involvement in the crime. Sheriff Johnson said the following during an emotional press conference. "I hope that this development, and what has happened here, will give the family a little bit of closure. While Tammy's family is grateful that the case has been closed, they still have lingering questions." Her uncle expressed, "We want to thank you for all that you've done. Closure will look different for each of us, but your efforts mean a great deal to us. Thank you. Thanks for watching."
you.